All right, I've been given the green light to go, so let's go. How are you all doing this evening? Good, 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 fantastic. I love to hear other things. And good, everybody says good, but I'm feeling great. My name is Gabe Diaz, and I'm speaking to two audiences. So we have the audience here in person, and we also have a virtual audience on Facebook Live. So a lot of people are enjoying the program tonight, but you all have the front row seat. So I appreciate you all joining us here in person. For those of you all who do not know me, my name is Gabe Diaz, and I am the executive director. No. This is the star of the show tonight. I'm the executive director for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here for the city of Hampton. Huge title, but my role within this city is to ensure that everyone in the city feels welcomed and supported and included in all things that we do and all the services that we provide, regardless of your age, your gender, your sexual orientation, your socioeconomic status, wherever you may fall in Hampton. We want to make sure that you're welcomed and you feel supported. So I oversee two citizen-based commissions and a youth advisory group. And one of those citizen-based commissions is co-hosting this evening, along with the Hampton History Museum. That organization is the Citizens Unity Commission. So we, with this commission, are a volunteer group of individuals that look to promote and highlight diverse groups and bring programs together, such as this tonight, so that people can experience different perspectives from their vantage point in life. So I'm very, very pleased to have you all join us here this evening. We have an amazing presenter. For those of y'all who are not familiar with her, we are going to create a great atmosphere for learning, for education, but this is also a safe space to ask questions at the end. So I have the great pleasure of introducing a good friend of mine. She's a colleague of mine. But she's also a mentor, and oftentimes mentors don't know that they're in a leadership or in a mentor role until after the fruit has produced itself. And although I feel like I'm fully grown, I'm still very much growing in this work here. Shadra, you have afforded me the opportunity to sit at your feet. You have been a facilitator for our flagship program, Hampton Diversity College. Shameless plug, if you all didn't see the brochure at the desk, I encourage you all to take a look at this brochure. It's an amazing conversation platform where we were able to engage individuals in the different facets and concepts of diversity and equity and inclusion. So Shadra has been an amazing facilitator within that program. But I do want to just read a little bit about her because she comes with a wealth of information, many, many accolades that precede her. But I did want to let you know that we have a superstar in the room this afternoon. Absolutely. So the title alone really spoke to me, and it says, "Nobody Knows My Name, Remembering the Middle Passage and Confronting America's Amnesia About Slavery and Its Aftermath." So this will be presented by the CEO and Executive Director of the Sankofa Project, Ms. Shadra Pittman. She also has been carrying on the theme of remembrance. It's an amazing international ceremony that she has given us the opportunity to witness here within Hampton for over 12 years now. It's an amazing ceremony that I'm sure she's going to share more about that experience and how you all can connect with that. But her most recent accomplishments and affiliations, she has recently interviewed the daughter of the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with many, many topics of research that she's conducted. She's done some extensive research and interview with one of our hidden figures here within Hampton, Miss Katherine Johnson, who is actually on display right here in the History Museum, an amazing exhibit that I would love for you all to check out. But she's really been an instrumental part of Hampton and moving the story forward and telling Hampton's truth and telling the story that she's done extensive research on. She is an anthropologist. She is a digger. She's a philanthropist. She's a daughter. She's a bringer of light. And when I say daughter, I mean she's a daughter of universe, but we have the amazing privilege and seeing the light that she brings come from the light that brought her. So her mother is here within our presence. So Queen Mother Cecilia Pittman, yes, we honor you and your greatness, Mother. And we thank you for bringing this great gift to us for Shadra. So I'm not going to take any more time because the words that I say are mere into comparison of the amazing words that she's going to bring forth from us. So thank you so very much. If you would please join me in welcoming to the Hampton History Museum, again, Ms. Shadra Pittman.
So, thank you, Gabe. Imara, thank you. It's a joy to be back home. I'm originally from the Bronx, New York. I always tell people that as a disclaimer. I'm from the boogie down. But Hampton has been my home for 17 years, so it's really nice to be back. So thank you. Thank you all for coming out this evening. And so before I begin, I want to do two things. One, I want us to take a moment to pause for land that we are on, the stolen land of our Native ancestors. I think it's important. So if we could just take a moment for that and just reflect. I always like to start out with a Native tribute of some sort because they were here first. So just out of respect, when you're in someone's house, you speak to them, you greet them, yes? So that's why I do that. I also want to, in the spirit of the ancestors, now I'm going to have that young man. I'm dating myself by calling him a young man, but there's my friend. I told him I was not tech savvy, and I meant that. I know what I do well, and I know what I don't do well. Okay, thank you. So you ask for help, right? Thank you. Okay, so I just want to play.
Get 'em in, get 'em in.
Just listen.
That sun is hot and plenty bright. Let's get on to business and get home tonight. Bid 'em in. Auctioning slaves is a real high art. Bring that young gal, Roy, she's good for a start. Bid 'em in, get 'em in. Now here's a real good buy on about 15. Her great-grandmammy was a Dahomey queen. Just look at her face, she sure ain't homely. Like Sheba in the Bible, she's black but comely. Bid 'em in. Gonna start at 3. Can I hear 3? Step up, gents, take a good look, see. Cause I know you'll want her once you've seen her. She's young and right, make a darn good breeder. Bid 'em in. She's good in the field, she can sew and cook. Strip her down, Roy, let the gentleman look. She's full up front and ample behind. Examine her teeth if you got a mind. Bid 'em in, get 'em in. Here's a bid of 3 from a man who's thrifty. 325, can I hear 350? Your money ain't earning you much in the banks. Turn her around, Roy, let 'em look at her flanks. Bid 'em in. 350's bidding, I'm looking for 4. At $400, she's a bargain sure. 4 is the bid, 450. $500 now, look alive, bid 'em in, get 'em in. Don't mind them tears, that's one of her tricks. 550's bidding, who'll say 6? She's healthy and strong and well equipped. Make a fine lady's maid when she's properly whipped. Bid 'em in. 650, don't be slow. 7 is the bid, gonna let her go. At 7 she's going, gone. Pull her down, Roy, bring the next one on. Bid 'em in, get 'em in, bid 'em in.
Ashe. So I wanted to start with that song because nobody probably knew her name, right? That's an auction that you were just listening to for some of you if you're unfamiliar. And I titled the lecture this year, Nobody Knows My Name. This is actually one of James Baldwin's books. So we wanted to give a little ashe to James Baldwin. But nobody knows my name because my work has centered the forgotten. As Gabe was saying, I do work with Katherine Johnson. I've done stuff with Bernice King and Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I've done a lot of really famous people that people pay attention to, right? But some of my most heartfelt and significant work is to honor the ones that the world has forgotten. Those are the ones who wound up in the burial ground in New York, which I'm going to talk about, and those are the ones who wound up in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so, and the thing is, somebody knew their name. We just don't know their name, right? Because they had names. Now, I would like this to be interactive. I'm just going to say that from the start. I don't want it to be like I'm sitting here and giving a lecture and you all are there. So if you have questions, if you have something that you want to say, please raise your hand. If you're moved in some kind of way and you want to say something, let this be a communal event, okay? Can we agree? Yes? Okay, perfect. Sure.
Since I say it often in my church and all around, the word ashe, A-S-E, some of us may not even know what ashe means. Can you just maybe give us a 2 seconds what it is? What does ashe mean?
Sure, ashe, so it's like amen. It basically means and so it is. So if you believe it, it's a confirmation of whatever someone is saying. So it's A-S-H-E, ashe. I like to say ashi. because I'm a woman. You see the feminist in me, right? But yeah, ashe. So it means, and so it is. So instead of saying amen, if you wanted to be more neutral, you could say ashe. It is an African derivative of that word. So nobody knows my name, remembering the Middle Passage and confronting America's amnesia about slavery and its aftermath. I'm gonna have my friend come here because I don't know how to advance. Friend. I believe in life. Oh, I see it down here at the bottom. I believe in life that you should, I found it. See, thank you. You see, I needed you to come in the room, that's all. I think it's important in life to get help when you need it. Never be ashamed to ask for help. I'm not. So Sankofa, can you hear me? Do I need to use this mic? Yeah. Okay. So Sankofa, does anyone know, I'm sure many of you know, but who could tell me what Sankofa is? Sankofa. And it is on the screen. Don't cheat. Yes.
Well, the way I was taught it, I attended Hampton University, and it was one of the African proverbs that we use in our 5-year MBA program.
Okay.
The interpretation that we were given was reach back while climbing. So kind of like each one teach one. So regardless of where you are in your journey, you can still be a help to someone else. So reach back even while you're climbing to whatever you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's your name? Sequay. Thank you, Sequay. That's beautiful. Yes. So Sankofa, my friend, thank you. I have to hold this thing. Okay. So Sankofa, yeah, that's perfect. Perfecto. Thank you. See, friends. So Sankofa, as Sequay said, it's a bird, okay? It's also a funerary message. So this is something that you give to your loved ones once they've departed and going into the afterlife. Sankofa has the feet pointing forward, right? But the head is pointing backwards. And the symbolism is, in order to know where you have to know where you've, and this is an egg representing the future. So it's the totality of the human experience, right? In order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've come from. And so Sankofa, I named my project the Sankofa Projects because at the burial ground in New York, we found metal tacks on top of one of the coffins, and it was in the shape of what we thought was a heart. It turned out to be a Sankofa symbol. One of the scholars said, no, that's not a heart, that's actually Sankofa, and it's from the Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. So go back and fetch it. So what are we gonna go back and fetch? Oh, this thing moves quickly. Our memories, absolutely. So I like to say what I do is I excavate history. I like to dig up the pieces that no one's talking about because there's a lot of untold history. I explore critical time periods. I also advocate for social justice and human rights. Presently, I'm in a program at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. It's called the Anthropology of Peace and Human Rights, and I work for the Institute for Human Rights. So we do everything around human rights. Anything and everything to advocate disability, sexuality, feminism, sexism, the full. Child trafficking. You'd be surprised at, well, I'm sure many of you wouldn't be surprised at how our rights are being taken away. That's a part of this conversation too. So remembrance, what I do, I honor people, the famous and the forgotten, critical time periods that shape history, things like the Pettus Bridge, Bloody Sunday, the bombing in the church in Birmingham, so critical time periods in history, and then sacred spaces which hold memory of what happened there. Places like the African Burial Ground in New York, Fort Monroe. If you have not been to Fort Monroe, you must go. You must go. It's the landing place. And it's also the place where we found our freedom. Thousands of black people walked to Fort Monroe for their freedom. That's why they call it Freedom's Fort. Did you know that? Yes. So it's not only the place where we landed as a place of enslavement, but it's a place where we walked to our freedom. That's powerful. So Saidiya Hartman says that every generation confronts the task of choosing its past. Inheritances are chosen as much as they are passed on. When is it clear that the old life is over and a new one has begun, and there is no looking back? From the holding cell, was it possible to see beyond the end of the world and to imagine living and breathing again? She's talking about the holding cell. She's talking about the barracoon. She's talking about Africans being in the dungeons. So when they were there, could they imagine breathing again, right? And so every generation, we must decide if we want to choose our past, if we want to look back. You don't have to, and a lot of people don't. And a lot of people in Florida don't want us to. It's true. It's true. It's just a fact, right? It's true. It's a fact. Anytime you are banning books and anytime you're taking information away from children, I always say, you give children the information, and they do with it what they wish. Information is power, and it's not harming anybody to teach it. So, you said memory, right? So who controls the memory? Toni Morrison, ancestor, said memory is a deliberate act of remembering. It's willed creation. So who is remembered, who is forgotten, and who decides? That's what I want to know. That's my research. Who is remembered, who is forgotten, who decides? Well, Brian Stevenson says that slavery didn't end, it evolved. On the left, well, on the right, depending on where you're sitting, 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, an African-American man was put on top of a wagon and carried through town as a deterrence for other people, saying, stay in line. Then you have 2014, Michael Brown, who bled out on the ground in the sweltering heat for 4 hours. That was also to send a message. Slavery didn't end, it evolved. Then we have Tennessee, right? And the lynching is what they're saying was happening to the two Justins who were advocating against gun violence, and they were dispelled. Remember, they were thrown out from they were expelled from the court. Justin Jones said that it is a public lynching, what happened to him, because he was advocating for children's rights. He was advocating for children to stay alive and not be shot down in school, and he got thrown out. Now, mind you, some weeks before, this thing is really moving fast. I'm going to ask my friend to come back, because this has a life of its own, because I'm not touching anything. But a couple of weeks before this lynching, what he called a public lynching, one of the lawmakers in Tennessee asked if we could bring back lynching, hanging by tree. Google it. Tennessee lawmaker, lynching. He actually said in the hearing that he wanted to bring back. So, slavery didn't end, it evolved. Nelson Mandela, another ancestor, said poverty is not an accident, like slavery and apartheid is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. These horrible things that happened did not happen in an abyss. They happened because we as humans have done these things to each other. So what I engage is, what I like to say, is a difficult but necessary conversations. You don't want to talk about it, I want to talk about it. You don't want to talk about racism, we're going to talk about it. You don't want to talk about sexual violence, we're going to talk about it. It is imperative that we talk about it. We cannot put blinders on and act like these things are not happening. They are. Fact, 1 in 3 girls, women, will be sexually assaulted in her lifetime. Fact. We have got to talk about that. So I wanted to be an anthropologist, largely due to my mother. I'm glad she's here. Quick story, my mother used to buy us International dolls when we were little, the little tiny dolls. And we had a chest of, 4 shelves, these dolls all over the world. And I used to look at them and just in awe. Wanted to go to law school, and then I found anthropology, and it's due to my mama, because she instilled early on, I don't know if she knew what she was doing, and maybe she did, maybe someone told her, a spirit told her to send me these dolls, but it formed my love for the field of anthropology, of people and cultures, and the purpose of anthropology is to make the world safe for human difference. We are all different, and we have a right to be here and a right to be respected, as Gabe was saying. The work that they do at the Unity Commission is about that. So we have deliberate acts of inhumanity that have happened in this country. We have the Native American genocide. We have the Trail of Tears. We have the Japanese internment camps, which happened in this country. We have the Jewish Holocaust. we have a father and a child who were trying to swim to safety, and they didn't make it. I will say this, just some of the images, so we're talking about slavery, and we're talking about injustice. So there's some images, there might be an image of a lynching. Some images may be hard to see. So in advance, I say I'm sorry if that touches you deeply, but this is our history. And we don't do a service to the ones who have passed on by not confronting it. So we're still here living, so maybe we can make a change so these kinds of things don't happen. Okay, so I just want to just let you know that there may be some images coming up beyond this one that may be difficult to see. And this was in Syria, 5-year-old boy. Can one photo end a war, right? Coretta Scott King once said, how can you talk about peace and prepare for war? You can't do it at the same time. We do it, they do it, I don't do it. The powers that be do it, right? And then we had the children who were separated from their parents along the border. Baldwin says, I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her. It is our duty, it is patriotic to talk about what's wrong with this country and what's right. We should be proud of what's good, and we should also be willing to criticize the things that we know are morally wrong. So we know that race is an idea, not a fact, okay? Race is a concept. There's nothing rooted biologically that makes race, okay? So basically, we are all a part of what? The human race. We are separated by our cultures. Some people are from Sweden, some people are from the Caribbean, some people are from Puerto Rico, right? The Caribbean. We're from all different places. The way I describe it to the little ones when I teach anthropology to them is I say, you know, if a giraffe really likes an elephant, they cannot make a baby, okay? Separate species, right? Humans can procreate. We are the same. We really are. But some people felt that we weren't, and that's what we're going to get into. Because race is an idea, not a fact. There was a time in our country where we didn't mind talking about race, though. I think it's quite interesting now that there's all this talk about we don't want to talk about race, and we can't, and it's woke, and all this noise around race. We can't talk about it. We've always been talking about it. We've never stopped talking about it. Jim Crow, Bloody Sunday, 1965. Was that not about race? The Woolworth counter, was that not about race? Right? When America did not mind talking about race? We're talking about race. What I find very interesting is that laws were enacted so that people couldn't drink from the same water fountain. However, African women could be used as wet nurses. The irony, right? I covered her face out of respect for her because I don't know her name. But I thought it was important that you see this image. So the struggle of man and woman, we've got to start including the women. The struggle against humanity, okay, against power is a struggle of memory against forgetting. A lot of people want us to forget this. But it's our past. We can't talk about Thomas Jefferson without talking about Sally Hemings, right? And if we don't, it's a willful ignorance. People are choosing to remain ignorant. People are choosing to not have the difficult but necessary conversations. So this was Roseanne Barr, and I'm showing a couple of these images because I want you to see the influence that celebrities have, right? Celebrities, politicians, the cultural hegemony, the cultural feeling about people. She's saying the Muslim Brotherhood and the Planet of the Apes had a baby. She's referring to one of the politicians. Then we have, right, so the simian that's ape-like is shown here with Obama. A rabbi calls people monkeys. And then H&M, you remember, got in a lot of trouble because a little boy was wearing a T-shirt that said something of the jungle. So the myth, here we have Carson, bless him. There were other immigrants who came at the bottom of slave ships who worked even longer and even harder for less. How do you work harder or longer than enslavement? Think about that. Harder and longer for less. How do you work less than free? Right? According to the United Nations, the transatlantic enslavement trade is the largest forced migration in history, the largest and most inhumane. The bottom of the enslavement ships is where they were. So my work began with the buried. I'm doing work now of the unburied, the ones who lost their lives and wound up in the Atlantic Ocean, but the buried population, the groundbreaking discovery of the New York African Burial Ground. And I always like to talk about it because I often find that there's 1 or 2 or 3 people who don't even know that this exists. So I'll just, 2 seconds. They deserve it. The burial ground was, our office was 6 World Trade Center. So 4 months before 9/11 hit, I moved to Virginia. So I was there for 4 years at that building. The burial ground was rediscovered. The original burial ground, this is, I'm giving a tour here to a group of people. We would bring people to the African burial ground site so that they could pray, so they could have a moment of reflection. The original burial ground, it was called the Negroes' Burial Ground on historic maps. And this burial ground is in the Wall Street area of New York, if you can believe it. Wall Street. That was undesirable land. 10 to 20,000 African men, women, and children are buried today under Wall Street. Today. So they were building this building, $276 million building, and they did a cultural resource survey. They looked at old maps. Now, you notice the name is Negroes, right? Is there a Negro land? Because your name usually goes to, you know, if you say you're Swede, right, you're from Sweden. If you say you're Italian, you're from Italy. If you say you're French, you're from France, or one of the places that were colonized, right? Negroes, this was an intentional way. They didn't want the Africans to remember that they were Africans, so they gave names like Negro and colored to disconnect them from their culture. Okay? That's a fact. The burial ground, as you can see, they are in coffins, buried in wooden coffins. Many of them were shrouded in cloth. The only time Africans had any liberty was when they buried their dead. They were allowed to gather because there were laws, the slave codes. And I say slave codes as I'm quoting it. I don't call people slaves, but the slave codes, it was a group of rules and regulations on what Africans could do. They could not gather, they could not drum, there was a whole list of things that they could not do. Because there was fear of what? What do you think? Yeah, fear of insurrection. And rightfully so, if you're enslaved, right? So one of the only times they had liberty was when they buried their dead. And Audre Lorde says, without community, there is no liberation. So it took a community of people to come together to honor those who wound up in the African burial ground. 50% of the population of that burial ground were children, were babies. So the resistance, right, of Africans, on the historical map, it said Negro. But if you look here, the use of the term African was used ubiquitously in everything they did. The African Free School, it was the first instance of public schooling in New York. The African Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Mutual Relief Society, they were very clear about who they were. They never, when they had the autonomy to name their organizations, they never used colored, they never used Negro, they consistently used African because they knew who they were, right? This is an ad we found in 1829. This is the only proof. This is my pride and joy, I have to tell you, because as a researcher, finding these kinds of things is like finding Lucy in the ground, you know, who was the first woman found. This was an ad, and it says New African Burying Ground. So from this, we were able to change the name to the African Burial Ground, because we had the actual proof. If there was a new one, there had to have been an old one, and the old one was the one that we excavated. So there were a lot of myths about African retentions. One of the sociologists said when the Negro landed in the United States, he left behind him almost everything but his dark complexion and his tropical temperament. I don't know what that means. They say he was stripped of his social heritage. I beg to differ. Because in the African burial ground, we found a woman buried with waist beads. Now, mind you, this was an enslaved population. She is buried with waist beads. She held on to her culture. We also found dental modification. So the teeth were shaped, as you can see. His name is Oda Bingo. We'll talk about him in a minute. Frazier said that Black Americans lost their heritage during slavery, and that was a lot of the rhetoric during that time period. But Sterling Stuckey, ancestor, said, I beg to differ. Africans held on to their culture. They practiced their culture and their tradition. And he believed in a Pan-Africanist approach, that Africans didn't lose it. It was not lost in the belly of the ship, that they brought it here with them. And we see evidence of that in the markings. This is an advertisement. You see Williamsburg? Williamsburg. Okay? And they identify him as an Igbo, okay? So they know he's from somewhere in Africa. And they have an actual place. And they talk about his country mark, gashes of his country mark on each cheek. That is also a symbol of culture. Hershkovitz, who's an anthropologist, said that American Negroes under their skins are but Africans. I always show this one because it points to the brutality of slavery. A lot of times when we talk about slavery, I gotta get up. I don't like sitting down. If you look at this, can you hear me over there? I'm supposed to have the mic. I play by the rules. Okay, so this is burial number 25. I always like to point her out because nobody knew her name either. Burial number 25 was a woman who was about 21 years old. She suffered a Lefort fracture to her face. She was hit with a blunt object, which crushed her face. This hole is not from injury. That's just the ground moving above and sedimentation coming down. This is pointing to a bullet. This was the musket ball of the day. So she was shot. So she was 21, she was shot, her face was crushed, and they say slavery didn't happen in the North and that it was benign. This is New York, right? And we don't know her name, okay? This is also a burial of, can you see the arm crooked? You see the dark soil? What do you think that is? No. Good guess, though. Somebody said it. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not stepping on that. That makes me nervous. That makes me nervous. Her arm is crooked here. And this dark part of the soil is a child. But think about this. We may not have known her name, but think about the love and the humanity that they gave each other. This is an enslaved population. They are burying their loved one with waist beads. They are shrouding the dead. They're doing all these burial practices. We may not know her name, but they took the time to wrap the arm around the baby. That speaks to a level of love and humanity that is just, to me, because who would see this? They didn't know that this was going to be dug up all these years later, right? But they did it because they wanted to connect this mother, we believe mother, with this child. So we may not know their names, but we know that they loved each other. So while the linguistic bond might have been broken, memory, my friend said memory earlier, memory, the cultural heritage, and the cultural continuity of the customs is what we have.
Question.
Yes.
Blacks of the diaspora.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So that means, so blacks of the diaspora, that's pretty much anybody. The diaspora is where people were dispersed. So it would be blacks in the Caribbean. It would be black people in Puerto Rico. It would be black people in France. It would be black people in Panama. So black people in Europe, everywhere. So blacks of the diaspora. So for the ones who have been dispersed out into the world, the linguistic bond, we may not be able to talk to each other in Igbo or Fulani or Swahili or Amharic. Amesaganalo konjok, that means hello in Amharic. We may not be able to speak that to each other, but what we were able to hold on to was the culture, the waist beads, the shrouding, that sort of thing. So that's what they mean by that. Good question. So at the burial ground they had a day of atonement. We did not know the names of the people who were buried there, but African priests, the man in front of me, I'm in the pink, but the man in front of me is an Akan priest who came to honor and apologize for their participation in the slave trade. They came here, well, to the States, to apologize for their participation in the enslavement trade, okay? The bones were put back into these wooden coffins, little baby coffins. Adinkras, as you were saying earlier about Hampton University. Ooh, the other HU. I know. Ooh, don't get me. I corrected myself. That's what happens, right? So the HU. Okay. Yes. Uh-oh, they're gonna start a war in here. So these coffins have Adinkra symbols on them. And so the Adinkra symbols are symbols which you give your beloved when they pass on. So Sankofa is one of them, but they have all kinds of Adinkra symbols. And they were placed in these little coffins and they were reburied on site. So they are not in a lab somewhere. They were reinterred at 290 Broadway. And if you were to go there, you would see the green area. They have a monument that's built. They have artwork inside of the building. If you have not been, you really should go. Spirituality, what we know, and we do this at Remembrance, is that we are connected. Holloway says that we are connected to, he talks about ring shout. Everything that we do at Remembrance is a circle. We are always in a circle. We're always in a ring shout. And passing children over a coffin is symbolic. We had people who came out to the burial ground and passed their newborns over the ancestors because they believed it was good luck. The ancestors were blessing their baby. And again, like I said, the dissenting community in New York did not know these people. They did not know their names. But they were connected to them. And they wanted to honor them. And they wanted to make sure that their story was told. So, excavating the truth of the untold history. Who controls the narrative of our ancestors? Right? There's a myth that African history begins with enslavement. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie says that if we only hear a single story that slavery is the beginning of African history, we risk a critical misunderstanding. Because what we know, as Mudabaraka said, slavery is not African history. It interrupted African history. And Ivan van Sertima, which I hold this book near and dear, so Ivan van Sertima, when I was working at the burial ground, came to the burial ground. He's an anthropologist, one of the premier ones. He's passed now, but he signed my book. This is like, for the nerds, this is like a big deal. But yeah, so Dr. van Sertima talked about the fact that Africans existed in the Americas prior to Columbus, prior to being enslaved. And we know that through this man, Estevanico. Have you all heard of Estevanico? Esteban? He was known as an explorer. He was here in the 1500s. I see a little person over there, so I'm looking at her. Did you know about Esteban? Well, don't feel bad, because a lot of people, I didn't know before I researched it. But when you go back to school, you can tell them that Estevanico was a black Moor. So before slavery happened, he was an explorer, and he worked with the Native American people. He was a healer. He spoke their language, and he was basically free. So, our history did not begin with enslavement. It interrupted our history. We know that Cleopatra, Hannibal, right, that we had a rich history prior to slavery. And slavery happened in a lot of places, right? Greece, right? But when you think of slavery, you think of, I don't know why this is going so fast. My apologies. It seems to be going fast. You think of this man. So for centuries, slavery became a forgotten crime against humanity because many people believe, the dominant nations believe, that people who were enslaved were not human. So their humanity was challenged. But we know anthropologically, this is where I come in, okay? We know that the origins of humanity are rooted in Africa. Fact. Not to be debated, not up for anybody's opinion. It's a fact. It's a fact. It's science, okay? What we also know is that in 1974, Donald Johanson found in Hadar, Ethiopia, 40% of a skeleton that is a woman. She was dubbed the name Lucy. It was, I think, a Beatles song playing, and so they named her Lucy. But Lucy is 3.2 billion years old. And this is the mother of civilization. Found where? Yes. But there have been racial myths that have been happening, right? So where did all this come from? You know, how do people become enslaved? How do people, suffer under genocides, right? Why does that happen to certain people? Well, because there are these racial myths out there that distort our ideas about human difference. So much so, we have these hierarchies of humanity. And you see at the bottom, it's a chimpanzee. And at the top, it's of someone of European descent. And then you have the Negro. So the first American anthropologist believed that they wanted to set the Negroes apart from the whites. That was very important for them. They wanted to define the Negro's place in nature. Okay? And that place was enslavement. So scientific racism, eugenics, we're going to pick out the best qualities of people and let them procreate. Phrenology, we're going to study the cranium and say, you know what, he has a really big cranium, so that means that he's really smart. Craniometric measurements, they're taking images and measurements of the cranium, the skull, and determining that these people have abilities based on certain measurements. It's called pseudoscience. It is not factual. Okay? What's interesting, though, is that one of the scientists said, but the skulls are white. So that must mean that the earliest humans must have been white. Let's think on that for a minute, beloveds. All of our skulls are white, right? So this is what I mean when we're talking about science is telling us one thing, and then we have these opinions, we have these racial stereotypes. These are some of the people. I'll just go through them really quickly. Carl Linnaeus, he looked at organisms. He was the one who framed principles for species. He named organisms. Herbert Spencer, Samuel Morton. He talked about the inferiority of races. Henry Louis Morgan, Daniel Britton. Britton is interesting because this one, he provided scientific justification for the lynch law. So when Ida B. Wells was fighting against lynching, his pseudoscience was used to justify lynching. So these people had powerful positions. So this is not, the important thing about this, the reason why I'm showing you these people is that they weren't just anybody in culture. They had positions in culture, influential positions in culture. And so Lee Baker said that the social construction of race, it helped to solidify racial and cultural inferiority. The reality is no one is inferior to anyone else, but they had to do this for a reason. There was a reason, right? If you're going to enslave people, you need to make them less than you, because then you can take the mother away from the child. Then you can cut off the feet for running. Then you can lynch them and bring your children and have lunch, right? If they're less than human, if they lack humanity, then, and they're not Christian, that's another part, right? So Christianity was used, not that Christianity is bad, but Christianity was used to say, well, we're Christians and you're savages. There's a distinction between us. And that allowed for the maltreatment of other people. Blumenbach, this is the one who said that the skull is white in color, which we may fairly assume to be the primitive color of mankind. The origin of the species, in 1859, Darwin said the cradle of humankind was Africa. But anthropologists disliked that. They did not believe that the dark continent was the place for the original Homo sapiens. How could you have the people who were enslaved be the beginning, right? So they fought against that. So I wanted to show you this image here when we're talking about working even harder, the image of the child. I think we often, when we think of slavery and we think of the names and we think of the ones that we did not know, I often think about the ones who were on these plantations and what dreams they had. Who was a singer? Who was a dancer? Who wanted to be a doctor, right? They're not just people in photographs. Like, we don't know their names, but they have stories. Kanye said, not that I support Kanye at all for anything in life or the life thereafter, but he said that that slavery was a choice. And the reason why I show you this is because he influences people, right? So he's saying it's a choice, but look at the gentleman next to him. Was that a choice? Clearly it's not. Yes, please, sure.
What Kanye said was after 400 years, it sounds like a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that he was discrediting or degrading the history. He was just saying in that 400 years, you would think that they would have risen up
Mm-hmm.
and, like you said, an insurrection or something.
Right, and they did.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, yeah. I think
Right.
a lot of people just, not a Kanye fan, first
Yeah.
of all, let me get that out there.
Yeah.
But just what he was saying, how people perceive
But, you know, and thank you for saying that. And I think the problem with that, though, is that anytime you put slavery and choice in the same sentence, you've lost the conversation. It's over. It's over. So you can, you know, first of all, you know, people think that slavery ended, like Brian Stevenson said, slavery didn't end, it evolved. So after slavery, right, there, you know, you fast forward, do you think that people, not you, but I'm saying in general, for us, the day after slavery, do you think people were like, oh yeah, so now we're neighbors? No. That was the most horrendous time for Africans in this country, right? And so when we think about slavery, like I said, and I only mentioned and showed that because the notion of slavery as a choice, I just think is ridiculous that anyone would even say that. And you know, we have to be careful when we have platforms because people take what we say to heart. They may not do the research and then run off with this, thinking that, and what could people have done during Jim Crow? What could people have done in Tulsa, Oklahoma when their communities were burned down? So, Mary Turner, 1918, we do know her name. She fought against enslavement. She spoke out against the lynching of her husband, and she was murdered. Interesting enough, her child also was cut from her womb. Yeah. So Nina says slavery has never been abolished from America's way of thinking, and sadly it has not. Moore said that families were great even though we had slavery. And these are politicians. These are people that we've elected into office. He did lose, yeah. He lost. He lost. He's in Alabama. Oh, yeah, so he lost. Thank goodness. Thank you for saying that. The reality is the auction blocks, the intentional separation of children. That's why when everything was happening with regards to the Mexican children being separated from their parents, people were saying, this is not the first time this happened in this country. This country has a history of separating parents from their children. Douglas said, you see the husband torn from the wife and the children torn from the parents. So over the past 2 years, this was dated in 2018 is when this was said, they talked about the persistence of racism, just talking about leaders and people that we have in power. We remember when Trump put out an ad on the Central Park Five, only to find out that the young men were innocent, right? He called for them to be executed. The power of words, the power of political positions. And so by institutionalizing slavery, there were ideas about racial inferiority. Those ideas created a worldview about people, okay? So we have our Attorney General, Herring, who wore blackface. We have Florida's Secretary of State, who dressed up as a woman in blackface. We have our Governor Northam, actually was in blackface too, right? And so what we have to acknowledge also is that racism, the idea of race and hierarchies, impacts people of color at all social and economic levels. Remember when Henry Louis Gates, remember he was going into his home, Harvard professor, going into his home and he was arrested, right? So money, power, influence does not change your status, right? Because that seed was planted from Blumenbach, from Linnaeus, the early scientists who said there are these differences between us. The Negro is here, the other people are here, right? And so it will take comprehensive system level changing so that racial profiling is not continued in policing. There's a lot of work that has to be done. A lot of people have to unlearn a lot of the things that they've learned. What we know about race, it's a concept, right? It's not a biological concept at all. There is nothing rooted. I have more in common with you than I probably do than you, scientifically. Strange, right, to think of it that way. But science-wise, people who are cross racial lines tend to have more in common. And that's not genetics as far as you and your family members, but there's not as much difference as we think that there is. That's why if you need a kidney, right, you could get a kidney from someone who is from Taiwan, if you're a match, right? So Sarah Bartman, I'm just going to give you some names of some people, because we were talking about nobody knows my name, so there's some people that we do know their names. Sarah Bartman, she was, anybody familiar with Sarah Bartman? She was from South Africa. She was put into a Paris museum, and her body parts were on display for hundreds of years after she died. It was only through Mandela that her body was returned to South Africa. Sarah Bartman, that was one of the images that they had of her. She was also known as Hottentot Venus. So she is actually known as the first example of sexual trafficking, 1815. When people talk about sexual trafficking, tell them Sarah Bartman. We also have Ota Benga, 1916. We know his name. Ota Benga was known as a pygmy, which is a derogatory term, means very short in stature. He was brought to the United States, and where do you think he was placed? Somebody said it. The Bronx Zoo. He was on display in the Bronx Zoo with the primates. And he was so overwhelmed by his life that he committed suicide. He shot himself in the chest, in his heart. So that when we talk about scientific racism, we talk about the pseudosciences, we talk about all of these things, the impact that it has on people and their lives, right? Did he even know what suicide was, where he's from? Did he have a gun where he was from, right? What we need to realize, too, is that racism is not just black and white. And I think in this culture, we automatically think black and white, black and white. We're so polarized. But racism affects everybody. This young woman is saying she refers to herself as a Chinese Puerto Rican because both cultures have shaped her life. And she gets to check both boxes. We need to do something about these forms that have us checking only one box. It's not fair for people who are multi-ethnic, multiracial. So racism is not about how you look, it's about how people assign meaning to how you look. Okay? Read that again. Racism is not about how you look. It has nothing to do with how you look. It's about how people assign meaning to how you look. He's saying he's Mexican, not Latino, not Hispanic. So, Toni Cade Bambara, who is, I call her the mother of the movement for remembrance, she said we must reclaim those bones in the Atlantic Ocean. These are the bones of Africans that were thrown overboard, those who jumped, and they were thrown overboard potentially because they were troublemakers. They were the ones that were going to rebel. And also because maybe food was running low and water was running low. So the men who were, in charge of that group of Africans that they were transporting, they weren't going to go hungry, so you get rid of the cargo. So I say that to say that healthy people were thrown overboard as well. John Henrik Clarke said that if the Atlantic were to dry up, it would reveal a scattered pathway of human bones marking the various routes of the Middle Passage. And those are the names that we don't know. So here in Hampton, we talk about the 20 and odd, right? 1619, we talk about the contraband. And in the middle there is a Middle Passage story, and that's what we do at Remembrance. Remembrance is in honor of the transport, those who lost their lives Those red lines are the places where they wound up. It's an image of Africans being tightly packed on ships, human beings in chains, sexual violence. But we know, as Langston said, Negroes, sweet and docile, meek, humble, and kind, beware of the day they change their mind. We know that Africans fought back. Nat Turner Rebellion, the Stono Rebellion, Araminta, that's Harriet Tubman's name, freed over 300 people, 19 trips. Muhumisa and Kaigirawa were women who were leaders in African nations, and they fought for freedom as well. Queen Nanny, I'm showing you some of these women because a lot of times the women don't get talked about. Virginia Woolf has a quote where she says, "Anonymous in history is a woman." A lot of times our stories don't get told. And then Queen Nzinga. She fought off raids for 30 years. 30 years. Did you have a question in the back? Question in the back? Okay. So, looking at our time, one of the things that I wanted to say about the Nat Turner Rebellion, just to go back to that really quickly, as I was talking about the bodies, Nat Turner's, when he was killed, you know, Nat Turner gets the, some people say he's a hero because of what he did, because he fought back, right? Other people see him as a villain because he killed a lot of people. But in a time of war, that's what happens, right? I will tell you that what they did to Nat Turner, and this goes back to the notion of nobody knows my name and that people are not honored and treasured for being who they are. Nat Turner was flayed. You know what that? Familiar? He was skinned. His skin was taken off of his body. It was made into wallets. He was also quartered, and his head was circulated for many years. It was just returned to his family a couple of years ago, his head. So it was passed down in an heirloom situation with people. And this is what we speak of when we speak of the inhumanity of people, right? These hierarchies of humanity that are not rooted in anything scientific. So the bodies wound up in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's known as the watery grave of the Atlantic. This image is of remembrance. It speaks about remembrance occurring on the second Saturday in June. But I love this image because here on the right, you have a young man who is pouring out liquor when someone has died. And you know, young people do that, or at least they did back in the 80s. That was something that people did. If someone passed away, you would pour liquor on the ground. But that's a libation. Now, he may not have known that what they were doing was a libation, but do you see what he said earlier in the presentation, that they might have lost the language, but they kept the cultural. They passed it down. They passed it down. And that is just incredibly significant. Yes?
They have a song out called "I Tears My 42, You Homeboy, Gangsta Lean." And you know, when you look into music, spirituality, these are the same things that you get implanted in your brain.
Of course, of course. Absolutely. Well, and music, that's why I played the music in the beginning of, these are some images of remembrance that are showing. That's why I played the music in the beginning of the auction, because I think we remove ourselves from history, right? And I think what happens with slavery often is that people say, oh, you know, there are two emotions that happen with slavery. People feel embarrassed and ashamed of slavery, and then other people feel guilty. And it's straight down racial lines, typically. The reality is there were benevolent white people who hid people in their basements. There were people who fought during the civil rights movement, right? So when we talk about things like white supremacy and we talk about things about violence and systemic racism, we're not talking about people. We're talking about systems of power that go way back, that created these hierarchies of humanity that said that these people are here, these people are here, these people are on top. And we still have that perpetuated today. The fact that the young man was just killed on the train in New York and was having a mental health episode, Neely, right? Jordan Neely. And then the people who killed him were not immediately arrested. The fact that the young boy was looking for his brothers. His mom said, go to this house. He went to the wrong address and was shot. 15, right? 15, 14 years old. What is it about, some say it's the adultification of black youth, right? But what is it about that fear of the other that makes us feel like we have to be violent towards one another, right? A lack of respect for our humanity. The reality is that slavery, as Toni Morrison said, slavery broke the world in half. It broke it in pieces. And slavery is not just African American history, it is American history. It is international history. When you follow the coins, the money of those who profited from the enslavement trade, it's all over Europe. And so we collectively, if we, as a humanity, are ever going to get this thing right, we have to look beyond the phenotypical matter, what our complexion is, what our hair looks like, you know, how broad is our nose or how narrow are our lips. None of that stuff matters. We have to connect on a human level to one another and work with people who are willing to do the work for justice. Because that's what we want. We want everybody involved. No one gets cast out and says, no, you can't be a part of it. No, we need everybody. We need everybody. These images, as we close, I'm just showing you some images of remembrance. Remembrance happens on the second Saturday in June. This year it's going to be June 10th. It's going to be at Fort Monroe at 11 o'clock. It's free and open to the public. Just wear white or something African inspired if you like, or something cultural from your culture. Bring a flower so that you can place it in the water. And the symbolism of the water is that that is their grave. They were never buried. So the water is symbolic. We actually refer to it, a historian, I'm trying to remember her last name, Stevens, I believe, says that she called it the watery grave of the Atlantic. So it's the actual burial ground of these ancestors. So as I said, the past, right? Is the present. And so if we are to move this forward, which I believe we can, do you believe we can? Yes. I'm not convinced. Do you believe that we, collectively, as intelligent, passionate, spirited human beings, can work together to create a different kind of world? Yeah. We have to, right? Right. The law of the Iroquois says that whatever we do, the great law of the Iroquois says that whatever we do, we must consider the next 7 generations. So it's not just about us and our lives. This is about our children, our children's children. 7 generations out is how we have to start to think if we're really going to affect change. So with that, I will close, and I will open up for questions if you have any questions.